Hi friends, Krista here. Thanks so much for stopping by Books and Jams. It's January 17th and I'm a little bit late with talking about the books that I've read already this month. I love doing mid-month wrap-ups. It allows me to break down my reading so that by the end of the month, I don't have a humongous list of books to talk about. I've read 6 books so far in January. Haven't finished anything in like 4 or 5 days, so I am slowing down just a little bit. But let me talk about the 6 books that I've read so far this month, and then at the end I'll tell you what I am currently reading and also what I got for the Booktube Spin, since I didn't do a separate video for that. I did participate at the beginning of January in the Read in the New Year Readathon, which was hosted by Holly at Lovely Day with Holly and Oshina from Oshina GottaReadEmAll. And I did choose 4 books for the prompts for that readathon, and I completed all 4 of them. So let me tell you about those books. I read Pictures of Hollis Woods for a book that was under 200 something pages. And this is by Patricia Riley Giff. It was a Newbery Honor winner. And I loved this book. It's the first book that I read for the year and I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was fantastic. In this book, we follow Hollis Woods, who is in the foster care system. She has been since she was a baby, always has been in foster care. She never knew her birth parents. She has built up these strong walls around herself because of her circumstance. She just really has a hard time letting people in, and she tends to be a runner. But she's very gifted with art. As we follow Hollis in the present day and what's going on right now, we also kind of get flashbacks through pictures that she's drawn, or as she looks at some of her artwork, we get these flashbacks, which is kind of cool. Near the beginning of the book, Hollis has run away once again, and she is brought to kind of an older woman, and this older woman is the one that finally is able to break through some of Hollis's walls. And we learn about her most recent placement. And I don't want to tell too much because it's a super short story, but I loved this story of this young girl learning how to let people in and becoming a part of a family and found family. And I just thought it was so well done. Of course, I teared up a bunch of times, and I just thought it was a wonderful start to my reading year. 5 stars. Fantastic. Fantastic. The next one, I'm not going to tell you my actual rating because it is one of my 5-star predictions, but I finally read A Place to Hang the Moon by Kate Elbis, which also kind of has this foster care element to it. In this one, we follow 3 siblings, William, Anna, and Edmund, and they had been living with their grandmother, and their grandmother dies very early on in the book, and they are left this pretty hefty inheritance, but they don't have a place to live at the time of the London evacuation of children out to the countryside. And so their lawyer kind of gives them a task of, when they go to the countryside, consider if the family that they end up with could be their permanent home. So they're kind of charged with finding their own permanent family. And he's like, don't let them know about the inheritance because they might have ulterior motives, which is kind of strange. But anyways, these 3 kids go out to the countryside in England, and they get placed with this family that the parents seem nice enough, but the 2 other boys in the family are horrid. And they find solace at the village library. But all 3 kids are super smart. One of them is reading through the encyclopedia. One of them really loves fairy tales. Like, they're just really smart kids. And I love their relationship with each other. I love good sibling stories. Oh man. The librarian in this village, she's a little bit ostracized by the people in town. The kids don't realize that at first, though, and they really connect with this woman because she helps them find books, and she really seems to see who they are and appreciate them. And this whole story was just so lovely. Again, I cried by the end. I'm so glad that I finally picked this one up. It was well worth it. Well worth it. The 3rd book that I read this year was also a middle grade. I was just in the middle grade mood at the beginning of 2022. I read the first book in the Wingfeather Saga, On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness by Andrew Peterson. This is one that I had started on audio, was having a hard time getting into it. So I switched to print for a little bit, and then I was able to switch back to audio. This one took me a little bit to get into it. Like I said, not just because of the audio, even when I was reading it in print, I was having a hard time connecting with it. It's a fantasy world, and there's a lot of different names of creatures and people. Like, there just wasn't very much that was familiar, which is fine because it's a fantasy world. It just took me a little bit to to get used to it. I love that this has a map. In this world where they live, these creatures had come across the dark sea of darkness from this king or whatever, and they were really oppressing this village. And they're pretty horrible. They're like werewolf warthogs. Like, that's how I was picturing them in my head. Like these wolf-like creatures that were just really horrible and brutal. And so we follow these 3 siblings again and their parents, and they learn about these jewels that the king across the sea really wants to find from this ancient ruling family. And so there's like this treasure hunt to try to find these jewels. There's this guy who lives up in the treehouse, which was really cool. There's toothy cows that are super dangerous. Like there's just a lot of adventure and this kind of treasure hunt throughout the story, along with this whole like political kind of oppression as part of the setting. So yeah, I'm very eager to continue with this series. I did get very invested by the end. It just took me a minute to get into it. So I did give it 4 stars, but I have heard that it gets better and better. So I'm looking forward to that. Yay for 3 middle grade, but that's it for middle grade. So if you're not here for the middle grade, don't worry. I have 3 more books to talk about and they are not middle grade. The 4th book that I read for the read in the new year Readathon was The School for Essential Ingredients by Erica Bauermeister. I really loved The Scent Keeper by her and was very interested in reading more of her books. And I really loved this. I typically say that I am somebody who prefers a very plot-driven, a plot-heavy book. This one is not a plot-heavy book. However, I did find it very gentle and sweet and kind of delightful in the long run. But what this is a group of people taking a cooking class at this kind of elite yet small homey-ish restaurant. The person who owns this restaurant teaches these cooking classes. So every Monday, this group of people comes together, and this book is divided out into all the different people who come to class. So we get these little snippets of their lives outside of class and how they all kind of come together and form a friendship together, and really by the end are very supportive of each other. We don't get a full picture of any of these characters, but it was just lovely. I loved the food that they got to make every time they got together, and I loved hearing a little bit about their lives and how they found connection and relationship with each other. So I just thought it was very wonderful. I also gave this one 4 stars. And I'm definitely interested in reading more from Erica Bauermeister. And I did learn that there's a companion to this. So that's kind of fun. I don't own it, but I'm glad that there's more. I read 2 more books at the beginning of the month that are both working towards some of my goals for the year. So it's kind of fun right at the beginning of the year to knock out some of those goals. The first one is my NetGalley. I kind of went through my NetGalley and put some of my oldest books on my list on hold at the library, and this one came in, Shadow Among Sheaves by Naomi Stevens. This one is a Christian fiction. Almost, I would call it a biblical fiction because it's an allegory or retelling of the story of Ruth and Boaz set in London in the mid 1800s. So in this one, we follow Rena and her mother-in-law, Nell. Rena is from India, and Nell and her husband and her son went there. It was during the time when India was a colony of England, and her father worked as a translator for the soldiers that were there and was kind of very well respected. Rena fell in love with one of the soldiers and they got married, kind of spur of the moment. But then, as the story of Ruth happens in the Bible, both Nell and Rena's husbands passed away. Rena decides to come back to England with Nell. It was very interesting to learn about culture in India at the time. Widows were very ostracized and even often killed because their husband had died, and so therefore they have no worth anymore. Rena's family would have welcomed her back into their home, but she would have had a very small life in India because of her status as a widow and because she had married an Englishman. So she decided to come with Nell to England. But in England, things weren't much better for her. As a foreigner, as an Indian woman, she was mocked and ostracized. And because of her connection to Nell, Nell was also the same. It just was a really, really rough situation for them, which was kind of cool to think about I mean, Ruth in the Bible was a Moabitess, like she was from Moab, and Moab and Israel did not get along. And so I wonder if Ruth experienced a lot of that same hatred in the Bible. I never had thought about it that way. So I love reading biblical fiction for the way that it kind of opened my eyes up to a deeper understanding maybe of what could have happened in the Bible story. Anyways, Ruth finally finds some charity from this landowner who owns these grain fields, and she's allowed to go behind the workers and kind of pick up what gets left behind. And then that charity extends to a house on his land. And of course, that begins this kind of romance. It's very much not a hate to love, but on Boaz's side, he is this landowner. He's very wealthy. Boaz, his name is not Boaz in here, it's Lord Barak. On his side, he's very wealthy. The idea of being with this Indian woman is just unheard of, but there's something that he keeps feeling drawn to her. Not just her beauty, which she is very beautiful, but also her character and the way that she sacrifices herself for her mother-in-law and deals with all of this hatred and cruelty from the people around her. Yeah, it was such a good story. I loved this so much. If you're a fan at all of biblical fiction, I would highly recommend Shadow Among Sheaves by Naomi Stevens. I think it's well worth the time and the read, and I gave it 5 stars because I just loved it. I just loved it so much. Yay! And then I had one more audiobook that I read at the beginning of the month, and that is Little Mercies by Heather Gutenkopf. She has been an author that I've been wanting to read for a while. I think I own 4 of her books. 2 years ago, when I first gave myself the goal of reading authors that I had multiple books of, she was one of the ones. And then last year I put a different author, but I still didn't read her. And then finally this year, I read one of her books, Little Mercies. Ooh, this was a doozy. In this book, we follow a social worker named Ellen. At the very beginning, Ellen and her husband oversleep and they get up and it's rush to get out of the house and get to work. They have kids and they're trying to figure out very quickly who's taking who and where are they going. And Ellen, on the way to work, gets a call about one of her families, from one of the kids of one of her families who's in potential danger at the moment. Ellen speeds over to that house to see what's going on, is standing outside with the cops and everybody who's outside of this house, and doesn't realize that her baby was in her vehicle. It's summer, it's super hot out, and her baby spends a lot of time trapped in her car seat in the car. Other neighbors see the baby in there and get her out, but she'd been in the car for quite a long time and has to go to the hospital immediately and has heat stroke and all of this, and they don't know what's going to happen. So Ellen is now under suspicion of being like one of the families that she works with. Like, she is denied access to her daughter until the investigation is complete. It was a very difficult situation. It felt very realistic and heartbreaking and so well told. It was so well told. Parents are not perfect people. And this mom just made a mistake that could be deadly and had to face the consequences of that. But I love that being on the other side of things allowed her to kind of see a little bit more with compassion the people that she had worked with. Alongside of this story, there's a young girl who gets separated from her dad. And so we kind of follow this girl as well. I was just as invested in that story, and then how they come together at the end. It just was very cool. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. And I'm thrilled to say that I finally read a Heather Gutenkopf. 4 stars, not my last Heather Gutenkopf. I'm glad I have 3 more on my shelves. So here's my little stack of books that I've already read this year. Have you read any of these? What did you think of them? What did you read at the beginning of the year? But before I go, let me just use this as a check-in, right? I'm currently reading Ordinary Grace and Keeper of the Lost Cities, Lodestar, book 5. Really enjoying both of these. Fast-paced, love the characters, fantasy world, as opposed to much slower-paced, older man looking back on his one summer of his life. Deep dive into these characters in this town during this summer. Don't know where it's going. Much more like beautiful writing, and still really loving it, but very different from that one. For the Booktube Spin, I made a list and posted it in my stories on Instagram right before it happened because I almost missed it. And the two numbers that were chosen were number 8, which I got Voyager by Diana Gabaldon. So I have started this on audio. I'm very much at the beginning. I'm going to take my time with this. I have until the end of March, until the next round of Booktube Spin. So I've got plenty of time. And then I also think it was 13 for me, which was The Love Story of Missy Carmichael by Beth Morey. This is one of my Christmas book exchange books, and it's love story, so I'm going to save this and read it in February. But those are the 2 books I got for Booktube Spin, and all the books that I have read and what I'm currently reading. Let's chat. Tell me, how's your month going? Have you started out with some great books, with some ho-hum books? I would love to chat with you in the comments and hear about all the things. And that is going to be it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you being here. Happy January. Happy reading. I'll talk to you in another video very soon. Bye.